Let me begin with a question. Have you ever sat at a family table where every single word thrown at you felt like a trap? Where the people who are supposed to hold you up are instead the ones steadying the knife, pressing it a little deeper with each smile. I remember sitting there, listening to the scrape of cutlery against porcelain, the creak of old chairs, and my mother's voice slicing through the room sharper than any blade. $27,000, she said. All of it. And in that instant, I understood what this day really was. Not a meeting. Not a family coming together for love or care. No, it was an ambush. Quick reminder, most of you aren't subscribed. If you enjoy this, hit subscribe and like now. Then let's get back to the story. My name is Elena Ward. I'm 28 years old. And this is the story of how I finally stopped paying the price for being born. The table in front of me is old, its surface mapped with scars of dinners and battles long fought. My fingers find one deep gouge, a grove that I etched when I was 11, pressing a pair of scissors hard into its wood after my mother mocked me in front of a guest. Even now, the scrape feels warm under my fingertip, like that memory never really left. Across from me sits my mother, Lorraine. She's pressing her back against the chair in perfect posture, her eyes locked on me with an intensity that makes my stomach knot. Beside her, standing like a guard behind her throne, is Camille, my older sister. Arms crossed, jaw firm, ready to follow Mother's lead at every turn. And at the end of the table, with his eyes dropped toward his folded hands, is my father, Richard. His wedding band glimmers weakly in the sunlight. A man present in body, absent in spine. I had arrived 30 minutes earlier after being summoned for what they called a family meeting. But it took less than 5 to realize what it really was. A negotiation where only one side had any power, or so they believed. This is an opportunity, my mother continued, her tone lifting like she was pitching me something on an infomercial. A true family venture. Your contribution will change everything for us. Camille tilted her head, frowning with an expression she must have practiced countless times in front of a mirror, the perfected look of an empathetic older sister. We've actually been planning this for months, Elena. And then we thought, wouldn't it be nice to involve you this time? You're always saying you want to be included. My mind twisted around the word. Involve, include. They made it sound like generosity, but we both knew the truth. To my mother and sister, I wasn't a partner. I was a resource. A bank account with a pulse. I swallowed hard, my heart kicking in my ribs, not with fear, not anymore, but with the unfamiliar stirrings of something else. Defiance. So let me understand, I said slowly. I give all the money. And you two, what, manage it? Handle it? Mother waved dismissively, already annoyed by my caution. Of course. We have the connections, the experience. You, darling, have always been the obedient one. Better at taking direction than making decisions. That's a gift. She chuckled like she'd paid me a compliment, and I would receive... What exactly? Camille stepped in smoothly, her timing so practiced that it almost made me laugh. A percentage. She smiled brightly, though her eyes glinted with something colder. A smaller percentage, naturally. We'll be doing the heavy lifting. But still, you'll be part of it. You want to be a part of this family, don't you? The words fell heavy, invisible chains coiling around me. After everything we've done for you? That's what they weren't saying out loud. That's what they always left unsaid, like a weapon unsheathed but ready. For most of my life, I would have bowed my head here. I would have nodded, eager to prove loyalty, desperate to be accepted even at a loss. But things changed last month, thanks to a conversation in a cramped kitchen that lit the fuse of all the years of suppressed truth. Aunt Ruth had come unannounced, humming softly while she wiped my dishes with an old towel. She leaned closer that night, her voice collapsing into a whisper. Elena, there's something you need to know. Something about why your mother... She paused, her eyes wet with something she didn't let fall. Why she's always called you the accident. The word stabbed me, though I pretended to keep scrubbing. She told me what I'd always sensed but never named. How my mother's big chance at her career died the moment she found out she was pregnant with me. How she saw me not as her daughter, but as the derailment, the reason her life never became what she thought it should. And so she built an entire system where I had to keep paying penance for simply being born. That night, when the apartment went quiet and I was alone, I whispered to myself, it wasn't my fault. None of it was my fault. And something shifted. Now, in this kitchen at my parents' table, I carry that shift like armor. When exactly would you need this money? I ask quietly. Mom and Camille dart a look at one another, so quick you'd miss it if you weren't waiting to see it. Victory. She's asking when. She isn't refusing. In 3 weeks, Mother replies swiftly, opening her phone as if to text me the account numbers right now. Out of the corner of my eye, I caught my father's face turning up for the first time in the half hour I've been here. For a brief second, his eyes meet mine. I see sorrow there. Or maybe regret. Whatever it is, it falters and disappears the way it always does. He drops his gaze once more. I nod, each movement measured. I'll need to check my accounts. See what's available. My voice is shockingly smooth. So composed, I almost believe it myself. Camille beams, turning to Mother. See, I told you she'd understand. Family first, right, Elena? Family first. How many times have they said those 2 words to strip me of something vital? They used family first to make me hand over half my paycheck at 18. They used family first to keep me working double shifts to cover a boutique that never earned a single profit. They used family first when I wanted to save for a car, for school, for anything of my own, and they swallowed it whole. But looking at them now, my mother's triumphant smirk, my sister's tight smile, my father's silence, I realize something powerful. Those $27,000 they're asking for, it isn't just money. It's air, it's time, it's freedom. And maybe for the first time in all these years, I'm not going to give it to them. Because maybe family first shouldn't mean me last. And maybe, just maybe, this is the beginning of something different. I didn't sleep much that night after leaving my parents' house. I lay on my narrow bed in my apartment, staring at the ceiling cracks that formed a spiderweb across the plaster. My phone kept buzzing on the nightstand. Text from Camille, a reminder from Mom, even a short one from Dad. Make sure you don't forget this is important for all of us. None of it surprised me anymore. What did surprise me was that I didn't answer. For once in my life, I didn't leap to prove myself useful, obedient, available. I set the phone face down and let the screen fade back to dark. But the silence wasn't peace yet. The silence echoed. The next morning, I sat at my kitchen table, the one piece of furniture I'd bought secondhand but polished as though it were new. I opened my old journal, its spine worn from years of secrets, and let my hands flip through the pages. 10 years of scribbled calculations filled the paper. 10 years of my life permanently boxed into neat little columns of gains and losses. Excitement when a paycheck arrived. Tight, hurried notes calculating how much could still be hidden away. And then the inevitable entries, written with shaky bitterness. Money gone, drained for another of Mother's emergencies. April 7th, groceries for Camille while her card bounced. June 12th, dental bill so she wouldn't feel ashamed about her smile. September 22nd, Mom reminding me the electricity would be cut if I didn't help. Always the same pattern. What I saved wasn't mine for long. Finally, I flipped to the most recent page, the one untouched. Just a blank expanse waiting for what came after. I pressed my pen against the line and didn't write anything at first. My hand trembled. A part of me thought it might tremble forever, because who was I when I wasn't their lifeline, their payer, their scapegoat? What existed for Elena if I didn't give pieces of myself away? A sharp knock at the door broke the trance. My neighbor Ryan stood outside holding a plate of cookies, his sandy hair falling into his eyes, the smell of chocolate chip drifting into my unfamiliar quiet. Made too many, he said with that shrug he always used when kindness embarrassed him. But I saw the concern in his eyes. He'd noticed my late shifts, the bags under my eyes, the small ways I was unraveling while pretending not to. I accepted the plate, trying not to let my surprise show. There was something so startling about kindness offered with no hidden invoice attached. It was rare. Almost alien. Thanks, I whispered, softer than I meant to. His family called him every Sunday, he'd told me once, just to say hello. No demands, just love. I'd heard their laughter through our shared wall before, a warm sound of belonging. So different from the sharp silences of home. You okay? He asked, lingering in the doorway longer than neighbors usually do. For a second, I almost cracked open and spilled everything. Almost told him about the 27,000, my mother's voice, my sister's staged expressions. But the words caught in my throat. I wasn't ready yet. Before I could answer, my phone rang. Diane. The older colleague who had taken me under her wing at the office, The only woman I had ever felt came close to mothering me in any way. When I picked up, her voice slid into the cracks in my armor. "Elena, sweetheart, you're working through lunches again. And you don't look well. I know you say you're fine, but you're not. Are you?" Those words were almost enough to unmake me. The contrast was too sharp. Diane offering care while my mother demanded sacrifice. Ryan handing me cookies while Camille demanded my earnings. The world outside my family was showing me glimpses of something I stubbornly believed didn't exist. Affection with no price tag. Hanging up, I stared at my journal again. That blank page seemed to lay open like an invitation. I lifted my pen, and this time I wrote not a calculation but a sentence. "This money is mine. And it means freedom." My handwriting shook, but the words looked more certain once they sat there. On Wednesday, I acted on impulse. At work, I slid a personal time-off form across Diane's desk. She looked up, raising her glasses on the bridge of her nose. "A personal day? Elena, you haven't taken one in. Good heavens, 2 years? Are you sick?" "Not sick," I muttered, my fingers fiddling with the fabric of my cardigan sleeve. "Just need to take care of a few things." "Then take 2, she said firmly, putting her pen to the paper with a flourish. "One to do what you need. One to recover from it." I almost cried at how freely she offered something so simple. My parents had trained me to believe nothing was ever given without a cost, without someone reminding me later of the balance due. But here she was, handing it over without question. I folded the signed paper into my purse, uncertain whether the heaviness in my chest was fear or relief. That afternoon, I found myself sitting in a public library 3 towns over. The hum of fluorescent lights above me, the click of keyboards in rows, all anonymous, no one looking at me twice. I scrolled through listings of apartments in Bellingham, a city nearly 1,500 miles away. So far, it almost frightened me to whisper its name. But as I scanned the pictures, small balconies dripping with hanging plants, windows overlooking crowded streets, simple studios with sunshine painted across their floors, I felt something new stir inside of me. A rustle I hadn't felt since childhood. Hope. I jotted down addresses, numbers. I did the math in my head. It was within reach. Unbelievably within reach. For 5 years, I had built something Mother never imagined I could keep secret. Enough to begin a life they couldn't take away. That realization almost knocked the breath from me. Not this time. I promised myself. Thursday morning, I disguised myself in sunglasses and Ryan's borrowed baseball cap and walked into Riverwood Credit Union, palms damp, knees tight. If Mother ever found out, if Camille ever traced the paperwork, no. I couldn't let my fear narrate. The teller, her name tag read Tess, helped me transfer half my savings into a new account with only my name. For the first time, I watched my signature stretch across a form that no one else could lay claim to. Tess studied it and frowned lightly. "Your signature looks a little different from what's on your ID," she said, sliding the papers back. "I'm working on that," I replied, and for the first time the truth of that answer hit me fully. I was working on it. On all of it. On myself. When I stepped out of the bank, the sunlight felt different. Like it wasn't filtered through my mother's blinds or bitter laughter. Like it wasn't cut into narrow strips by obligation. It felt like freedom in its earliest stage, fragile but real. That night, sitting back at my kitchen table, I opened my journal again. On a clean page, I began a new list with trembling hands. I wrote things I have survived. One by one, the pen flowed across the paper. My mother's coldness, my sister's cruelty, my father's silence, the monthly contributions that hollowed me out, the constant reminder that I was an accident, an unwanted interruption. When I reached the bottom, I added one final bullet. Being called a mistake my entire life. I stared at that line for a long time before carefully tearing the page out. I folded it once across the center and slid it into my wallet. A promise kept close against me. Tomorrow, I whispered to myself. Tomorrow I will begin. The ducks at the pond outside my building quacked in messy unison when I stepped out later, as if mocking me, as if cheering me on. I laughed unexpectedly, a sound so rare it startled even me. And in that laugh, I felt it again, that shift from dread to defiance. I was not mistaken. Not anymore. By the time Sunday rolled around again, my chest felt like it carried something heavy but volatile, like a secret ready to spark. I spent the morning pacing my apartment, my journal open in front of me, my half-empty coffee gone cold. Every time I thought about my mother's voice saying all of it, I clenched my fists so tight, my nails left half-moon marks against my palms. And yet something in me had shifted. I wasn't only angry, I was calculating. That Sunday night dinner was a tradition, a weapon disguised as routine. I had grown up believing it was about love, about keeping family close, but by now I understood better. It was about surveillance, about checking that I stayed in line, that my body, my time, my very soul stayed available. Walking into my parents' house again felt like stepping onto a stage where the ending had already been written. The smell of pot roast greeted me at the door. That was Mother's tell. She only made it when she wanted something. The expensive cut paid for somehow with money she'd long pretended wasn't mine. The table had been laid as carefully as if the president were coming over, a spread too elegant for a normal Sunday. "There you are," Mother said without glancing at the clock. Her voice carried equal parts annoyance and triumph. "Sit. Let's eat before it gets cold." I noticed her hands shaking as she carved the roast. Not nervousness, never that. Excitement, like a wolf who had already cornered her prey. I took my seat, opposite Camille, who smirked like she had some secret knowledge about me. About my future, about inevitability. I kept my face still, my fork steady, though my mind was anything but silent. Dinner began with small talk. Camille bragging about a new client she had managed for her consulting job. Mother sighing dramatically about her friend's hip surgery. My father mentioning how his car was making a strange sound. Each topic skidded across the surface like ice skaters refusing to dip beneath. I waited, because I knew it was only a matter of time. When she finally struck, it was with surgical sharpness. "So, Elena, have you made a decision about our venture?" I set my fork down slowly. My first instinct, my lifelong habit, was to stall, to smooth, to placate them with vague promises. But tonight, staying vague wasn't weakness. It was strategy. "I'm still considering it," I said, my tone deliberately neutral. Camille laughed through her nose. "What's there to consider? It's not complicated. It's a no-brainer." I tilted my head slightly, forcing myself to breathe evenly. "Then you won't mind showing me the business plan, the projections, the market analysis, that kind of thing?" The knife clattered down against my mother's plate as if I had said something obscene. "Don't be absurd. This is family, not some corporate hustle." But Camille leaned forward, grasping the opening. "Actually, we were talking. It would be so much simpler if you just let us handle it directly. You could make us co-signers on your accounts. That way, everything flows cleanly." Her eyes gleamed with the satisfaction of someone sure they would get their way. She thought I was already bent, already breaking. "He's right," my father muttered softly, surprising me. He cleared his throat and tried again louder. "Maybe we should give Elena some time to think." His voice carried no conviction, but even that thin thread of resistance shook me. It was more than he usually offered. "She's had enough time," Mother snapped, reasserting control. She fixed me with the full force of her eyes, green and golden and harsh. "Opportunities don't wait forever. You either stand with this family or you stand against it." Across the table, I felt the edges of myself harden, sharpen. The truth was staring back at me in her glare. There was no deal, no opportunity. Just hunger. They weren't building anything. They were planning to consume me. I lifted my glass slowly, took a measured sip of water, and looked straight into her eyes. "Then I need details, specifics. Otherwise, it's nothing more than a story." For the first time, she faltered. Silence spread, thick and suffocating. Even Camille's smirk slipped slightly. For years, they had relied on my silence, on my willingness to surrender and calculate later how I'd rebuild what they took. Now my request for accountability pulled the mask from their scheme. "We're still finalizing," Camille muttered finally. I leaned back in my chair, pressing my palms against my knees to keep my expression calm. Inside my chest, my heartbeat was its own applause, a rhythm I'd been waiting to hear all my life. "I see." I lifted my fork again and cut into the roast, chewing slowly as if the conversation required nothing more from me. They didn't know it yet, but the money, their so-called opportunity, was no longer theirs to claim. I had already moved half into accounts untouchable by their grasp, and soon the rest of me would be gone too. Later, after the plates were cleared and the forced chatter stuttered into silence, I walked toward the front door. My mother followed, her polite host expression stretched tight across her face. Just before I stepped outside, she leaned close enough for her breath to warm the shell of my ear. "Don't test us, Elena. You owe us more than you can ever repay." I paused at the door, my hand hovering over the handle. For most of my life, those words would have broken me, forced me to fold. This time I breathed once, deeply, and without turning back said, "No, I don't." The cool night air hit me as I stepped out, my chest expanding against it. My pulse was pounding, but not with fear. With adrenaline, with life. In the distance, I swore I could hear ducks laughing at the pond again, or maybe they were applauding me. For once, maybe the whole universe had decided to clap. Monday morning, the next shift appeared, faster than even I expected. Diane pulled me aside at work, her warm eyes kind but serious. A manila folder slid across her desk. "Elena, that transfer you inquired about months ago? It's open again. They're asking who I'd recommend, and you know who I told them." I blinked stupidly, unable to process it all at once. "Transfer? To where?" She smiled. "Bellingham. Starting next month. If you want it." For a moment, my lungs forgot how to work. I had spent my entire life caught in this one web my family spun around me. Moving out of town had always felt impossible. Too large, a fantasy out of reach. But here it was. Offered. Real. "You're one of our best people, Elena," Diane continued. "Don't ever let anyone convince you otherwise. Think about it." I nodded numbly, gripping the folder until the edges creased against my palms. Think about it? No, I didn't need to think. For the first time in 28 years, I knew exactly what I wanted. By the time I returned to my desk, the resolution was already taking shape in my mind. The saving? The planning. The years of sacrifice. Every cent my mother wanted to claim had built not just money. It had built an escape. All that was left was to take it. The folder Diane gave me sat on my kitchen table all night, a silent witness to the storm inside me. Every time I looked at it, something inside me whispered, "This is it. This is the door you never thought would open." I didn't touch dinner that night. I just sat staring at the manila cover, the black letters typed neatly across it. "Transfer request. Bellingham branch." My hands moved over the edge of the paper again and again, as if I needed to confirm it was real. As if the letters might dissolve into smoke if I stopped touching them. Later, lying in bed with the glow of the folder still seared into my vision, I realized something chilling. For years, I had told myself I couldn't leave. That mother, Camille, and even father needed me too much. That they had hooks in me so deep no other life could exist. But the truth was slowly unwrapping itself. They didn't need me. They only needed my money, my compliance, my silence. It wasn't me they wanted in their lives. It was the version of me that bent and broke to serve them. And suddenly, the ceiling above me looked different. Like maybe it wasn't a ceiling, but a sky I hadn't dared to climb into yet. The next few days blurred into quiet planning, every moment threaded with fear and hope. I told myself this needed to be careful, secret. If Mother sniffed even a hint of what I was doing, she would tear apart the plan thread by thread. On Wednesday night, I sat cross-legged on my bedroom floor with two piles of things in front of me, what I would take and what I would leave behind. The pile of take was surprisingly small. A handful of clothes, a framed watercolor I painted in high school, my grandmother's thimble collection, the snow globe my father once gave me from a business trip. The leave pile was far larger. Old books, cracked mugs, clothes I associated with exhaustion, boxes of memories too heavy to drag into a new beginning. I stared at it all for a long while because the realization hit harder than I wanted to admit. Most of what I owned wasn't mine. It was survival clutter. Evidence of how low I'd kept myself to fit the mold of being their afterthought. But not anymore. On Saturday, while Mother and Camille went to my Aunt Joanne's baby shower, I used the emergency key still tucked inside a false panel in the garage and slipped silently into my parents' house. I told myself I wasn't robbing them. I was reclaiming what had always been mine. The gardenia candle burned faintly in the living room, the same scent Mother always used to mask the rot underneath her perfection. The air felt dense, like a silent accusation. My pulse hammered as I crept toward the attic, lifting each stair step carefully to prevent its creaks. Father's handwriting glared up at me from a blue plastic bin in the far corner. Alina. Documents. My chest tightened as I snapped open the lid. There they were. My birth certificate, social security card, diploma, vaccination records. The physical record of my existence, locked away in their attic for years under the excuse, they're safer here. You'd just lose them. The folder was lighter than I'd imagined. Impossible almost that my entire life could weigh less than a sandwich. But clutched to my chest, it felt like the foundation of the new self I was building. I slipped out as quietly as I came. By the time I reached the street, my knees were trembling, but the folder pressed hard against my ribs steadied me. That evening, I sat by the pond again, watching ducks glide across the water, their reflections trembling under the ripples. I pulled out my notebook and began a new exercise. At the top of a blank page, I wrote the words, "Things I have survived," and then the words poured, my mother's coldness, Camille's cruel smirks, my father's silence, being called the accident more times than my own name, the endless financial draining dressed up as family obligations. And at the very bottom, I added the boldest words I had ever written, living as if I was less than I am. When I finished, I folded the page and tucked it into my wallet. It didn't feel like paper. It felt like a shield. The coming week, Mother circled closer. Her text grew sharper, more urgent. Camille sent me heavy-handed reminders. Mom says you're stalling. Don't disappoint us. My father's rare attempts chimed in too. Just send the money. Elena, don't make this worse. But every time my phone lit up, the glow of the folder on my table and the folded page in my wallet glared brighter. Then came Sunday dinner again. The final test. I walked into the kitchen where the roast simmered on the counter, where Camille was already pouring herself wine. The air felt crackling, heavy with expectation. I sat down at the same scarred table, and for a moment pressed my palm against that old groove, the one I carved when I was a child. This time, instead of pain, I felt defiance. Mother wasted no time. "So," she said briskly, "have you decided?" Camille reached into her purse and pulled out some papers. She slid them across the table toward me with a delicate smile. "We thought this would help simplify things. Sign here, Elena, power of attorney. That way we'll manage it all and you won't have to stress." I looked down at the papers. Each line curled like a snake, carrying my name across it, but none of my rights. Every benefit to them. Every risk to me. My father's throat cleared. "Maybe she—" "No," my mother cut him sharp. Her voice hardened. "Family takes care of family. After everything we've sacrificed because of you, this is the least you can do." I sat a long moment staring at the ink of my own name. And then slowly, deliberately, I reached into my bag. "You're right," I whispered. "This is about more than money." Mother and Camille exchanged triumphant smiles. They thought they had won already. I pushed a small gift bag into the center of the table. Inside, a silk scarf in a deep burgundy color. Mother's favorite shade. Wrapped beneath it was a sealed letter with her name spelled neatly across the front. "What's this?" she asked, her voice losing its edge for the first time. "My goodbye," I said simply, rising to my feet. "I know the truth now. About why you call me the accident. About the career you blame me for ending. About everything. I forgive you. But I'm leaving. Tonight." Camille's mouth fell open. "Aunt Ruth," she hissed, spitting venom in the name. Mother's hand trembled as she ripped into the envelope, her eyes devouring my handwriting with disbelief. "You can't just—" Camille started. "I already have," I said, walking toward the door with steady steps. "My things are gone. My apartment is empty. My new job starts next week. You won't be able to reach me." Behind me, a chair scraped violently against the floor. Father stood suddenly. For the first time in years, his eyes locked on mine with startling clarity. And then, in a whisper that sliced through the choking silence, he said, "Be safe." Those two words nearly broke me, but I didn't turn back. Outside, the air was cool, damp, alive. 30 minutes later, at the airport, I powered off my phone and tucked it deep in my bag. Tonight, for the first time since I was branded a mistake, I was no longer a daughter, no longer a scapegoat, no longer a source of fuel for their empty ambitions. Tonight, I was just Elena, and that, I thought as I boarded the plane, was enough. When the wheels of the plane touched down hours later, I pressed my forehead to the cool oval of the window and breathed in a silence so different it almost sang. The world outside was new. No one was waiting at the gate with demands. No one knew my name here to attach it to debt or duty. For the first time in my adult life, my arrival belonged entirely to me. That night, in a tiny rented room overlooking streets I didn't yet recognize, I lay awake on a mattress with sheets that smelled faintly of detergent and possibility. There was no gardenia candle here, no smell of guilt baked into the walls. Just me, just stillness. The silence did not echo this time. It expanded as though the air itself was stretching to make room for me. The next morning, I walked into my new apartment for the first time, my key scraping against the lock like a symbolic drumbeat. Studio sunlit, barely big enough to fit the essentials. But when I opened the blinds, light spilled into the space in soft ribbons, touching every wall as if blessing them. The landlord had looked confused when I offered 3 months' rent up front. He didn't need to know that this wasn't extravagance, this was survival. I needed to be sure it was mine, secure, untouchable by anyone else's reach. I set my small box of belongings on the counter, the watercolor I painted in high school, Grandma's thimble collection, the snow globe with the Chicago skyline trapped inside, and the journal, the only real witness of the last decade of my life. Spreading those items across the counter felt less like unpacking and more like planting roots. My first day at the new branch began with nerves trembling under my skin. Walking through the glass doors, I kept telling myself to breathe. New city, new office, new colleagues. The same me, except maybe not the same. Something had burned away when I handed my mother that envelope. Something had shed when I turned my back on Camille's stunned expression. I didn't realize it until now, but I walked differently. Straighter. My chest didn't cave inward as much. "You must be Elena Ward." A woman with silver-streaked hair greeted me, extending her hand. "I'm Sharon. Diane spoke very highly of you." Diane, my first ally, my unexpected anchor. My throat tightened with gratitude at the sound of her name. "Thank you," I managed, extending my hand. My palm didn't feel as sweaty as it should have. From that moment, my new beginning unfolded steadily, if awkwardly at first. There was coffee in the break room that no one guarded like treasure. There were lunch invitations I hesitated over but eventually accepted. There was laughter that rose naturally during team meetings, unpunctuated by sharp looks or sarcastic digs. Each day I left the office exhausted not from fear, but from the strange effort of letting myself trust that none of this was a trap. One afternoon, I crossed the street to a small coffee shop during my break. The barista smiled at me, asking if I wanted the usual. I laughed, shaking my head. "I don't have one yet. I'm new here." She wrote my name on the cup, her handwriting curling in cheerful loops. Elena. Seeing my name written without contempt, without edge, almost stunned me. I sipped my latte slowly, letting vanilla sweetness spread through my chest. It was a small thing, but in that moment I realized this is what freedom tastes like. The weeks slipped past quickly. My apartment began to look less bare. I filled my windowsill with tiny potted succulents from a weekend market, each one a symbol of survival in its own right. Some nights I leaned out of my window, watching strangers laugh in the street below. They didn't know me. They didn't call me a mistake. They didn't take or demand. They just lived. And for the first time, I felt I was doing the same. Yet freedom, I learned, comes with its own kind of haunting. Some nights, the ghosts of my mother's voice returned. "After everything we've done for you, you owe us more than we can measure." In the quiet, I almost believed her again. I almost reached for my phone, the one I had left switched off since boarding the plane. Almost, but not quite. Instead, I opened my journal and wrote on a fresh page, "I am not a mistake." Not today. Not ever again. The words rooted me firmly each time they threatened to blow me backward. 3 months later, a promotion slid across my desk in the form of a sleek envelope. Attention to detail. Initiative we value. Code of integrity. Signed by the department. Full of genuine recognition, not extracted loyalty, not secret extraction. Real acknowledgement that who I am has value apart from what I can provide. That evening, I sat in my little studio apartment, the promotion letter propped against an empty wine glass, watching the sunset smear the sky in pinks and purples. Pride rippled through me, strange and new. For years, everything I achieved belonged to someone else. To Mother's constant hunger, to Camille's needs, to Father's silence. Now, for the first time, my achievement was mine. Mine to savor, mine to frame, mine to use as a foundation for more. Freedom didn't make the past vanish. It didn't unburn the scars carved into my heart. But it made space for a new chapter written in my own hand. Still, peace was fragile. 6 months into my new life, during a quiet afternoon at the office, my phone vibrated on my desk with an unfamiliar number. Against my better judgment, I answered, "Elena?" The voice was thinner than I remembered, but unmistakable. My mother. My stomach dropped, old instinct pulling me tight like a marionette string. "How did you get this number?" I whispered. "That doesn't matter," she said, her tone trembling between desperation and command. "Your father, Richard, he isn't well. His heart, surgery, the insurance won't cover everything. We need you to come home." The old guilt surged violently inside me, a tidal wave clawing to drown everything I had built. But laced within it, stronger this time, was clarity. "I'm sorry to hear about Dad," I said slowly, carefully, and I meant it. But then I added with steadiness that shocked us both. "I can't come home. Not now." Her tone hardened instantly, the softness evaporating like mist. "Can't or won't? After everything we sacrificed for you?" I didn't let her finish. It was the first time in our entire history that I ended a call and not her. My hand shook wildly, but I pressed the button until the screen went black. That night, staring at my reflection in the small bathroom mirror, I whispered aloud, "I did it." I said no. The woman staring back looked older than when she left home, but also sharper, steadier. There was a line in her eyes that said, "You've survived worse than this." The hunt didn't stop there. A week later, a formal email arrived from Camille. Subject line, family obligations, veiled threats of legal action, accusations of abandonment, words laced with fury, an echo of mother's voice typed into neat paragraphs. I read it once, and then deleted it. I didn't reply. The ghosts would keep chasing. But I was no longer the old Elena. The next morning at dawn, I stood at my window as sunlight painted itself across the mountain peaks in the distance. For a long time, I simply breathed, heart steady, the city's quiet unfolding below me. Maybe they would keep calling. Maybe they would keep threatening. Maybe one day they would even try to find me. But as golden light filled my small apartment, landing on the makeshift shelf where my journal, thimble collection, and snow globe sat side by side, I understood one truth more real than any threat could ever be. I wasn't running anymore. I was living. The letter arrived on a Thursday morning, tucked into my mailbox among flyers for takeout restaurants I'd never tried, and utility bills with my name spelled correctly for once. The handwriting on the envelope froze me before I even slid it open. Sloped, elegant, slightly exaggerated cursive. My mother's hand. I closed my apartment door behind me and stood leaning against it, the envelope still unopened. For a long time, I didn't breathe. There was no gardenia candle here, no accusing silence. And yet I felt her presence pressing through the paper like smoke choking beneath a doorframe. When I finally tore it open, my eyes scanned pages already stained with tears, their marks warping the ink into uneven rivers. It was unlike any letter she'd sent before, filled not with direct commands, but with pleas, accusations disguised as grief, complaints veiled as pain. At the beginning, she wrote of sacrifices, all we gave up because of you. Later, she begged, wax dripping from a dying candle. I don't know who you are anymore. My hands shook reading it, though not with guilt. Something else. Sadness maybe, but shaped differently than it once was. Not sadness for her, but sadness for the years I lost trying to earn love written like this. I folded the letter carefully, placed it in a box I was building under my bed, labeled before. That's where I put things I no longer intended to carry but couldn't yet burn. Photos, old bank statements, and now, her words. I made tea after, sitting by the window, wrapping both hands around the mug and staring out at the mountains, their ancient outlines comforting, immovable. They had witnessed worse storms than mine, and they stood. Maybe I could too. It was Aunt Ruth who called that evening. Her voice crackled with urgency. They're planning to drive out there this weekend. My chest tightened. How do they know where I am? She sighed heavily. Camille tracked down an old coworker from the diner. You remember Teresa? She mentioned something about you moving west. Your mother figured it out. They think they'll just show up and scare you back. The fear was sharp, but it didn't hollow me the way it used to. I didn't feel like a little girl waiting to be punished. I felt like a grown woman holding a line drawn in stone. Let them come, I said finally, voice low but steady. I'm not hiding anymore, and there will be consequences if they try. Friday morning, I sat across from Patricia Wells, a lawyer with sharp glasses and a firmer tone. Her office smelled of old books and lavender, strangely exactly the opposite of my mother's suffocating gardenias. After telling her everything, spilling years of invoices disguised as birthdays, rent disguised as love, she pressed her palms together and nodded. They have no legal claim to your savings, she confirmed. We can issue a cease and desist letter immediately. If they arrive here and try to harass you in person, we'll be prepared to file for a restraining order. You're not powerless anymore, Elena. I whispered the words to myself after she said them, tasting them like honey melted slowly on my tongue. I'm not powerless anymore. That afternoon, I walked into my HR office at work. My manager, Paula, practical and kind, listened carefully as I explained the risk of my family attempting to contact me here. The words felt raw, ugly to air aloud, but she didn't flinch. She just clicked her pen, made notes, and said, "Employee safety is our responsibility too. We'll alert security, update your contact information, and block unknown calls and visitors from reaching your desk." It hit me then that not only could I build walls, I had people willing to help fortify them. When I returned home that evening, I dialed Aunt Ruth. "I need you to understand something," I told her gently but firmly. "I am not hiding. I'm standing my ground. If they show up here, they will find locked doors and legal letters, nothing more. This cycle ends with me." There was silence on the line long enough that my throat clenched painfully. Then her voice, soft but filled with something like pride. "You sound like you've finally become yourself." 2 days later, a thick envelope arrived via courier, stamped with my lawyer's letterhead this time, not my mother's looping hand. Patricia's cease and desist firmly outlined the consequences of harassment or contact. Holding it, I realized I had shifted roles. I wasn't the one being cornered anymore. I was the one delivering boundaries in black and white, unbendable. That night, I opened my journal again. Instead of listing debts or losses, instead of bleeding old wounds onto the page, I wrote simply, "They may come. They may rage. But I am not theirs to claim." Saturday morning dawned gold across the mountains, my apartment shadowed with light rising slowly up the walls. I stood barefoot on my small balcony, my tea steaming in one hand. The city below hummed awake, cars whispering down the streets, dogs barking lightly from open windows, strangers moving about their lives without caring who I was or what my past had been. I belonged here not because they invited me, but because I chose it. By Sunday evening, the knock never came. No pounding at my door, no screaming in the hallway. Either Patricia's letter arrived first, or they weren't brave enough to cross the line that, for the first time, had been drawn not by them, but by me instead. What came was another letter a week later, thinner this time. The edges soft, the paper streaked with tears. My mother's words again, but diminished. Not commands. Not accusations. Just desperation bleeding through. "I don't know who you are anymore." I read the letter twice. I folded it and set it gently in the before box. She was right, she didn't know me anymore. But for the first time in my life, I could answer why. Because I finally knew myself. I went to bed that night with my window cracked, the cold mountain air flowing in like a benediction. As I curled into new cotton sheets I bought for myself without asking permission, the thought anchored me in a way no demand ever had. I don't owe them anything anymore. And that is freedom. Healing isn't a lightning bolt. I used to imagine it that way. Like one moment I'd wake up electrified, shedding every scar overnight, the hurt erased as if it never existed. But the truth is messier, slower. Healing is small, careful steps. Sometimes forward, sometimes backward. Sometimes just standing still while reminding yourself that not falling is also progress. It was my therapist, Dr. Andrews, who taught me that. I found her office on a rainy Thursday, tucked above a bakery whose warm cinnamon rolls scented the hallway. I remember the first time I sat in the upholstered chair across from her, my hands twisting in my lap, my throat raw from explaining years of obligations disguised as love. She listened without interruption, her pen poised but hardly moving, her eyes every bit as steady as I had always wished my mother's could be. "You can acknowledge the hurt," she said finally, her voice gentle but firm, without continuing to live from it. "It shaped you, but it doesn't define you. It never had the right to." Her words rattled inside me for weeks after. Doesn't define you. I had spent all 28 years defined by a single identity: the mistake, the accident, the one who ruined her mother's dream. If that identity wasn't true, then who was I? So I started answering piece by piece. Every Thursday, I walked into her quiet office. Sometimes I left feeling lighter, sometimes exhausted, as though I'd carried boulders up invisible stairs. But every session loosened knots I thought I would die tangled into. At home, I would write bits of our conversations in my journal, not to trap myself in the pain, but to record proof of progress. Slowly, peace stopped feeling foreign. Beyond therapy, life unfolded in subtle miracles. The community garden near my apartment was one of them. I signed up on impulse, craving something physical, grounding. The first Saturday I showed up, the dirt still frozen along the edges of winter, a group of strangers handed me gloves and smiles. No demands. No questions about contributions. Just, glad you're here, Elena. My body remembered how to kneel in soil, how to press seedlings in gently, how to water and step back and wait. Waiting was the hardest part. I wanted instant bouquets, lush growth. But nature mirrored therapy. Growth required patience, and patience became its own kind of courage. It was there, crouched by rows of tomatoes, that I met Michael. He was older than me by a few years, with kind brown eyes and quiet humor, the type of person who looked directly at you without trying to make you smaller. He told me he worked as an accountant but preferred dirt under his fingernails on Saturdays. Our first conversations were simple, about plants that thrived in shade, about how the mountain sun could scorch impatience right out of you. Oddly enough, I trusted his silences faster than I trusted my own voice. When he asked a month later if I wanted to grab dinner, my first reaction was panic, like I was being tested for loyalty again. My mother's voice rose uninvited in my head. You're too needy, Elena. You're too difficult for anyone to want. But Michael didn't push. He only added softly, if not dinner, maybe just a walk. No expectations, that was the difference. No expectations, so we walked. Through winding streets as dusk smudged purples across the sky. He told me about his sister raising kids across the country, about missing them but being glad they were free. At one point, he paused and glanced at me. What about your family? He asked carefully. My stomach lurched, but instead of hiding it or inventing a lie, I told him what I could. Not everything, not yet. Just enough. That my relationship with my mother and sister was poisoned, that I had carried blame for things I didn't cause, that leaving was survival. He didn't flinch or pity me. He just listened. Listening, I realized, is a form of love, too. That night, after he walked me home, I lay in bed staring out my window at stars sewn against the sky. For the first time in my adult life, I felt the fragile beginnings of something I had believed I'd never deserve. Companionship untainted by debt. The circle of people here in Bellingham grew slowly, but unlike my family's circle, it grew with abundance, not scarcity. At work, Sharon brought me coffee on mornings she came in early. Diane's letters arrived every few weeks from my old branch, short notes reminding me she believed in me, each one ending with, "Don't you dare doubt yourself again." Ryan, back in my old city, texted pictures of gigs with his band and selfies with cookies he insisted were better than store-bought. And in the community garden, voices of neighbors tangled together in easy laughter. A patchwork warmth that covered me better than any commandment of family first ever had. Birthdays had been another wound for me. Each year reduced to invoices or obligations, never joy. But this year, on my 29th birthday, something astonishing happened. Messages poured in from my new circle. Colleagues, garden friends, even Michael, who brought me a small potted plant tied with ribbon. None of them expected me to give anything in return. No one asked for rent money or down payments or hollow apologies. They simply said, "Happy birthday, Elena," and meant it. At dinner that night, Marissa from the garden led a toast. To Elena, she said brightly, for having the courage to start again. Everyone clapped. I almost cried, not because of the words, but because these people saw me not as an accident, but as someone worth celebrating. Later that evening, back in my apartment, I opened my journal under the soft lamplight. On the first blank page, I wrote, "Today I turned 29. And for the first time, the world came to celebrate me, not because of what I gave, but because of who I am." I stared at that sentence longer than I've stared at anything. Then I smiled, small but real. Healing wasn't a lightning bolt. It was a bench in a garden, a therapist's steady eyes, a friend's cookies, a man's gentle patience. Healing was 100 small choices to believe I was worthy of more than survival. And every day, it grew just a little easier to believe. Boundaries. It's a word I used to flinch at because in my family's home, boundaries didn't exist. I wasn't allowed to keep a locked door on my bedroom. Phone calls were answered on speaker if mother suspected I might be hiding something. Even the few secret dollars I squirreled into a shoebox once were discovered and swept away with the phrase, "We're all in this together, Elena. Don't be selfish." But here, in this life I was slowly building, boundaries were no longer punishable. They were necessary. They were proof that I belonged to myself. It started small. The letters my mother began sending after Patricia's cease and desist showed up less frequently, but they still came. Tense envelopes arriving like ghosts at my door. I never opened them immediately. I'd let them sit on the countertop until I felt steady enough to read them. And when I did, I read them not as a daughter absorbing blame, but as an outsider, a clear-eyed woman evaluating another person's chaos. One letter arrived soaked with grief, lamenting my ingratitude and warning I would die alone in a tiny apartment. I folded it once and placed it in the before box under my bed. The next letter came with sugar-coated manipulation. "We can still fix this, Elena. Family is forever. Call me and bring the money with you?" That one I didn't even finish. Into the box it went. I didn't answer. Not once. Camille was subtler. Texts from numbers she sometimes changed. "Mom is crying herself to sleep. How can you live with yourself?" Or, "You'll regret choosing strangers over your own blood." And once, "Don't think you're safe just because you ran. We always find you." Those used to paralyze me. A years-long conditioning pressed me to believe they could appear at any moment to drag me back. But every time I received those words, I reminded myself, the locks on my door were mine. My landlord only answered to me. Patricia's letter still stood, ready to expand into stronger legal action if needed. I wasn't defenseless anymore. I wasn't the accident they could corner and control. Dad's attempts hit differently. His letters arrived once a month. Tentative, careful, pages of small talk. Lines like, "The neighbors bought a new dog," or, "Your cousin started college." Occasionally, slipped quietly into the bottom of the paragraphs, came scraps of confession. "I should have spoken up more for you. I hope you're truly happier there." Those touched a complex ache inside me. For a long time, I didn't know how to respond. Part of me wanted to throw those letters away with the others. Another part wanted to cling to them. Eventually, I began sending short notes back. Not enough to reopen wounds, but enough to acknowledge him. Polite, kind, distant. That balance felt right. Dr. Andrews applauded this. Boundaries don't have to be walls meant to punish. They're doors with handles you control. You open them for who you want, when you're ready. No more forced entry. Her metaphors sank into me deeper than my mother's lectures ever did. With each passing week, the lines I drew around my new life thickened, black and unshakable. For the first time, I wasn't afraid of being disliked. Sometimes love means losing one family to truly find yourself. At the office, my coworkers started inviting me to small things. Coffee runs, group lunches, trivia nights after work. At first, I declined almost automatically, a reflex left over from years of saving every cent for family demands. But one evening in early autumn, I surprised even myself by agreeing to attend a colleague's birthday dinner. We clinked glasses over candlelight, laughter bouncing easily around the table. At the end, when the check was placed in the middle, my chest tightened instinctively, expecting someone to push it my way. No one did. They simply split it fairly, each paying their part. It seemed so ordinary, but to me it felt revolutionary. Later that night, walking home under leaves crunching softly under my boots, I realized something. This is what family should have been. Not demands dressed as connection. Not invoices disguised as love. Just presence. Just shared joy. The garden became another kind of sanctuary. With each sprout I nurtured, with each vegetable I harvested, I felt a mirrored growth inside me. Michael became a steady presence there, his easy laugh grounding me. When he offered to drive me home one evening after we'd finished weeding rows, I almost declined. Old habits whispered, "Don't owe anyone. Don't let kindness turn into chains." But then I remembered, different people bring different patterns. He wasn't my mother. He wasn't Camille, so I accepted. The drive was short, the silence comfortable. Before I climbed out of his car, he said softly, "You look happier here. Elena, I hope you see that." That night, instead of questioning his words in spirals of doubt, I wrote them down in my journal exactly as he'd said them. Because some truths need to be recorded, so you remember they were real. Winter arrived quietly, snow softening the streets, mountains capped in white visible from my window. My small apartment grew cozier with the glow of lamps and the surrounding of books I slowly collected. I bought my first rug, a thick burgundy one that instantly colored the room in warmth. I lit candles in scents I actually liked, not ones chosen to disguise tension. Cinnamon, cedarwood, vanilla, scents that made me feel at home rather than erased. On December mornings, I'd stand at my window watching the city shuffle awake beneath snowflakes. Instead of planning how to survive another demand, I planned what to cook for dinner, what to plant in spring. That shift, small, ordinary, was monumental. On Christmas, a card slid under my door. Unsigned, but the handwriting inside was familiar. My mother's. She'd sent it without a return address. The words were brief. "Merry Christmas." "You're still our daughter." I stared at it long and hard before tucking it where it belonged, in the before box. Maybe she thought those words would lure me back, guilt me into rejoining the cycle. But being still their daughter didn't mean belonging as a scapegoat, a mistake. I was also Elena, my own woman, and those roles could not coexist. At midnight, curled beneath my blanket with snow frosting the windows, I whispered to myself, "My family may not know who I am anymore." But I do, and that's enough. By spring, my savings had grown past 10,000 again. This time untouched, unrated, truly mine. That number glowed in my account like proof of something greater than money, stability, safety, control. Each dollar represented the pieces of myself I had reclaimed. On my nightstand, my journal began to fill with new words. Not lists of losses, not calculations of survival, but affirmations, plans, goals. Boundaries are not selfish. Kindness from others is not a trap. I am worth celebrating. And maybe most important, the family you're born into shapes the beginning, but the family you choose creates the future. Sometimes that chosen family was Sharon's steady encouragement at work. Sometimes it was Marissa texting about dinner. Sometimes it was Michael quietly saving me the last ripe tomato from the garden. And sometimes it was myself, finally able to sit alone in silence without mistaking it for punishment. The letters from my mother and sister still arrive. Their need hasn't evaporated. Their hunger hasn't changed. But every time another envelope appears, I breathe, I slide it into the before box, and I water my plants. I answer kindness with presence, demands with silence, because now, finally, my life isn't theirs to write. It belongs to me. Love wasn't something I expected to find in this chapter of my life. If I'm honest, love wasn't something I expected at all. Not the romantic kind, not the safe kind. Growing up, love had been another word twisted into a transaction. If mother bought me shoes, it meant I owed double in chores. If Camille covered a lie for me at school, she'd bring it up for years as proof that her success outweighed my rebellion. Love was never free, but Michael didn't play by their rules. By spring, the friendship we'd built in the garden spilled naturally outside its fences. We met for coffee on Sundays when the market bustled, walked under blooming cherry blossoms in the park, shared small details about our days that didn't sound impressive or loud, but carried weight in their honesty. He never rushed me, never pressed. He just stayed present in a way that startled me into trust. One evening in April, after a long planting session, he offered to carry my bag of soil up the stairs to my apartment. My instinct flared instantly. No, don't let him in. Don't blur the line. Once people cross your door, they think they own it. But the look in his eyes was different. No hunger, no demand, just patience. So I let him, and when the door shut behind us, my apartment didn't feel invaded. It felt warmer. He paused at the shelf where my snow globe and journal sat. He didn't touch them, just smiled softly. "Chicago?" he asked, nodding to the skyline trapped in glass. "It was the one gift my dad gave me when I was little," I said, surprising myself with how freely I admitted it. "I've carried it everywhere since." Michael didn't make it into a story or twist it into a statement. He just nodded. "It suits you. A little world you hold yourself." For the first time, I realized how heavy silence had always felt at home, how suffocating. With him, silence didn't choke. It soothed. That night after he left, I sat at my desk and confessed to my journal. Love might not be a weapon after all. Maybe it can be shelter. Weeks blurred, spring ripening into the promise of summer. My apartment window filled with late sunsets. My succulents flowered unexpectedly. My savings grew quietly, unbothered by theft or guilt. I felt myself steadying piece by piece, like a puzzle once scattered starting to resemble something whole again. And then, in the middle of that calm, the letter arrived that changed everything. It wasn't my mother's handwriting, not Camille's. The letters were uneven, shaky in youth, but the name scrawled across the envelope in blue ink jarred me instantly. Jessie, my 19-year-old cousin. Camille's daughter. My hands trembled opening it, already bracing for another ambush written with borrowed lips. But inside was no manipulation, just raw, desperate words. Aunt Lorraine says you abandoned the family, that you think you're better than us. But I don't believe it, not completely. The way they speak about you, it doesn't sound right. I'm working 2 jobs while going to school, and Mom keeps saying I owe her for raising me. I'm so exhausted. Do you think I'm crazy? Or is there something wrong with me like they say there was with you? I read the lines again and again until the letters blurred through my tears. Jessie. Still just a teenager. Already being yoked into the same chains they'd strapped around me. The same cycle, same poisonous gaslighting, just a new victim in its path. For the first time in years, my instinct wasn't to fold. It wasn't to hide. It was to protect. That night, I dialed the number at the bottom of the letter, scribbled nervously in ink. She answered after 3 rings, her voice tired, wary. Hello? Jessie, I whispered, my throat thick. It's me, Elena. There was a pause long enough I could hear my own heartbeat. Then she exhaled sharply, a shuddering release. I didn't actually think you'd call. Mom said you wouldn't. I closed my eyes, pressing the phone tighter. You're not crazy. None of this is your fault. What you're feeling, tired, used, doubting yourself, I know it. Exactly. Because they did it to me too. She sniffled quietly on the other end. They always say family first. I laughed bitterly, though it caught on a sob. Yeah, family first. Which always meant me last. But Jessie, listen. You're not wrong for wanting to keep something for yourself. You're not selfish for needing rest, for wanting your money to be yours. You're not what they tell you, silence again. Then her voice, tiny but certain, then what am I? I looked around my quiet apartment, walls glowing with fading sunlight, shelves lined with things I had chosen, every corner humming with proof. You're someone who can break it. You don't have to spend years paying for their resentment. You can be more than what they say. On the other end, she cried quietly, but her breathing steadied. We talked for an hour, weaving stories of survival into something like connection. She told me about her jobs, waitressing late nights, early mornings at a print shop. How her mother told her tuition was her responsibility, despite promising otherwise. I told her about my 5 years of invisible double shifts, about the night I put a blank page in my journal, and finally wrote, "This money is mine." For the first time, I felt the weight of my story transform. It wasn't only mine anymore. It was a lifeline passed forward. After we said goodbye, I set the phone down and collapsed into my chair, hands shaking. Michael, who had come by with leftover bread, noticed my tears. "What happened?" he asked carefully. I told him everything. About Jessie, her letter, her exhaustion, her fear that mirrored my own younger self so precisely it shook me. I stopped only when my jaw ached from clenching it. Michael sat beside me on the couch, silent for a long moment, then reached over and wrapped his fingers around mine. His hand was warm, steady. "Then maybe the greatest thing you can do," he said gently, "is not just survive for yourself, but show her it's possible." His words echoed long after he left, filling every corner of the apartment. Not just survive for myself, show her it's possible. That night, I didn't sleep. I wrote pages in my journal, not about debts or even forgiveness, but about Jessie, about what I wished someone had told me at 19. That her worth isn't measured by sacrifice, that she is not an accident, that boundaries can be built, even brick by brick with trembling hands. By the time dawn lit the mountain peaks, a strange calm settled inside me. For so long, I thought my story ended in escape. That leaving was the final triumph. But Jesse's letter reminded me escape is only half the battle. The other half is showing someone else the way out. As the sun poured across my window, glinting off the snow globe on my shelf, I whispered to the invisible younger version of myself. To Jesse, maybe to both. We are not mistakes. We never were. And the life they say we can't have? We're already building it. The morning Jesse arrived, the mountains seemed brighter, as if they knew something had shifted in the air. I stood on the platform at the small station, my palms sweaty despite the chill, my heart racing with a rhythm I hadn't felt since my own escape. It had been nearly 2 months of late-night calls with her, whispering encouragements into the receiver like secrets passed down generations. Every time she cracked under her mother's guilt, I told her what I wish someone had told me. You're not broken. You're breaking free. The train screeched in, its metallic groan splitting through the valley's quiet. When Jessie stepped down from the carriage, her backpack slung loosely over one shoulder, my throat tightened. She looked younger than 19, thin with exhaustion, shadows etched under her eyes, but there was determination there too. A spark. The same spark I remembered feeling when I first clutched those documents in my parents' attic and realized I could have a life beyond their walls. Elena, she breathed when she saw me, her lips trembling like she still expected I might vanish. I stepped forward and wrapped my arms around her. For a moment, she went stiff in my embrace, as if affection was another trap. And then she leaned in, clinging tighter than I expected. I pressed my cheek to her hair and whispered, "You made it." Back at my apartment, she dropped her bag on the floor and stared around the small space as though it were a castle. "It's yours?" she whispered. "All mine," I said simply. She ran her fingers gently over the succulents on the sill, the rug on the floor, the bookshelf lined with stories. Small things to me now, but to her they glowed like beacons. That night, over bowls of pasta I made too salty but she ate gratefully anyway, Jessie looked up at me with wide, fearful eyes. What if I can't? What if I don't make it like you did? What if I fail? I reached across the table, taking her hand in mine. Jessie, if surviving makes you feel like failing, then you don't understand yet. Making it isn't about being perfect or never falling. It's about choosing you. Every day. One step at a time. You've already succeeded. You came. Her tears welled, but she nodded, clutching my hand tighter. Over the weeks that followed, Jessie stayed with me, crashing on a spare cot I borrowed from a neighbor. She picked up shifts at a nearby cafe and registered for summer classes at the community college. At night, she spilled quiet confessions, how her mother told her she owed rent the week she turned 18, how she was saddled with bills she never agreed to, how family first was always the weapon pointed at her too. Each story was a mirror of mine, familiar enough to ache but healing enough to know she wasn't alone anymore. I watched her face soften over time. The exhaustion didn't leave overnight, but slowly joy peaked like seedlings in spring. One evening, she walked in from her cafe shift carrying a latte she'd made herself, setting it proudly in front of me. "I didn't burn the milk this time," she said. Her laughter cracked open the room like sunlight. Dr. Andrews said in one of my sessions, "Sometimes healing is choosing boundaries. Sometimes it's deciding to pass forward what you've learned so others don't. Suffer as long as you did." Those words rang louder watching Jessie settle into freedom. My apartment shifted from sanctuary for one to sanctuary for two. Michael dropped by often, bringing bread and groceries, his smile never strained, his presence always gentle. Jessie found him amusing, teasing me one night. "You light up when he walks in, Elena. You know that, right?" I laughed her off, but inside, warmth bloomed. It was rare to be seen this way, rare to have someone not only notice my happiness, but celebrate it. By summer, the garden exploded with green, tomatoes heavy and vines twisting in abundance. Working side by side with Jessie and Michael, dirt under our nails and laughter in the air, I realized something powerful. I was no longer just surviving. I was thriving. One Thursday after therapy, I sat by the pond near my apartment with my journal and wrote something I never imagined I'd write. I am no longer living in reaction to them. I am living in creation for myself. It was then I knew the cycle was broken. For me, and maybe for Jessie too. The family didn't stop trying. Letters trickled still, some furious, some begging. One even came addressed to Jessie, demanding she return before it was too late. We read it together at the kitchen table. Jessie looked at me, her fear sharp. What if they come? I folded the letter calmly and placed it in the box beneath my bed with all the others. Then they'll find nothing but locks, I said firmly. And if they push further, they'll find walls I've built out of law, out of community, out of strength. They can't own us anymore. Jessie exhaled, relief replacing fear. For the first time, she smiled without hesitation. That night, before bed, she slipped a folded piece of paper under my door. When I opened it, her handwriting was uneven but steady. Thank you for showing me I'm not crazy. Thank you for showing me I'm not alone. I pressed the note to my chest, tears streaming silently down my face. A year later, on my 30th birthday, I woke to sunlight slanting across my room. On my nightstand sat a vase filled with wildflowers picked from the garden. A note attached, to Elena for choosing herself and showing me how to choose too. Love, Jessie. Down the hall, she had baked me a cake lopsided but perfect, Michael carrying it carefully into the room as if he were handling a masterpiece. My garden friends came by later with laughter and gifts wrapped in paper. My coworker sent messages, my supervisor emailed congratulations for another successful year. I blew out candles surrounded not by manipulations, not by guilt, not by demands to pay, but by love freely given. A kind of family I had stitched together from threads of care, choice, and trust. That night, alone at my window watching stars quilt the sky, I opened my journal again. On the first fresh page, I wrote, I am Elena Ward. I am 30 years old. I am not an accident. I am not mistaken. I am not a resource to be drained. I am not defined by the resentment I was born into. I am defined by the life I have chosen, honest, kind, free. The cycle ends with me. My family may never understand, but I do, and that's enough. I closed the journal, slipped it on the shelf between books I'd chosen, and turned off the lamp. Behind me, Jessie hummed in the kitchen while Michael laughed at something she said. Life pulsed, steady, warm, alive inside this small apartment I once thought too tiny to matter. And as I curled beneath my blanket, listening to their voices drift down the hall, I realized the truth that had healed me more than any number could. The family you're born into may shape your beginning, but the family you build for yourself decides your future. And tonight, in the quiet hum of love I had chosen, I knew my future had already begun. How did you feel about this story? Tell me which country and city you're watching from in the comments. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more stories like this.